morning, students. And after static friction, and after limiting friction, the static friction, limiting friction, they are not separate. Both are same. The static friction, limiting friction, the maximum static friction is called limiting friction. Maximum static friction is called limiting friction. Okay. Now, what is kinetic friction? When block is in motion, okay, when block is moving with velocity v on rough surface. When block is moving on rough surface with velocity v, and whenever block is in motion, the frictional force present between contacting surfaces. And whenever the block is in motion, the friction present between the contacting surfaces is called kinetic friction. Okay. Therefore, the kinetic friction is directly proportional to normal reaction. It is proportional to normal reaction. Therefore, the kinetic friction is equal to a constant mu k into n. Here, this mu k is called coefficient of kinetic friction. Okay, the kinetic frictional force is equal to a constant mu k into n, where mu k is called coefficient of kinetic friction. Coefficient of kinetic friction. Whenever block is in motion, the friction force present is called kinetic friction. Okay, and the kinetic friction is directly proportional to normal reaction. Fk is equal to a constant mu k into n. That mu k is called coefficient of kinetic friction. Okay. Now, rolling friction. Whenever the block is in rolling, the wheel is rolling. Now, the frictional force present between the contacting surfaces is called rolling friction. And here also, rolling friction is directly proportional to normal reaction. Only static friction is independent of normal reaction. Limiting friction, kinetic friction, rolling friction depends on normal reaction. Static friction independent of normal reaction. Remaining limiting friction, kinetic friction and rolling friction all are depends on normal reaction. Now here, rolling friction is equal to a constant mu r into n. That mu r is called coefficient of rolling. Okay, rolling frictional force is equal to the coefficient of rolling mu r into n. Okay, boss. Here mu r is called coefficient of rolling friction. Now, relation. Limiting friction is greater than kinetic friction, greater than rolling friction. Okay. In all frictions, limiting friction is greater magnitude. Least one is rolling. Okay. The rolling friction is, and whenever body is rolling motion, friction is very less. Okay. So, rolling motion is easier than sliding motion. Sliding motion kante, okay, rolling motion is very easier because of less friction. Okay. The limiting friction is greater than kinetic and is greater than rolling friction. Okay, boss. What is limiting friction formula? Mu s into normal reaction. What is Fk formula? Mu k into normal reaction. Rolling friction formula mu r into normal reaction. N and N cancel. Therefore, the coefficient of static friction is greater than the coefficient of kinetic friction greater than coefficient of rolling friction. Okay, boss. And a coefficient of static greater than kinetic greater than coefficient of rolling. Okay, boss. Actually, this mu value, the coefficient of static friction mu value is lies between 0 and 1. Okay, and the coefficient of friction is lies between 0 and 1. So 0 and 1. Okay, boss. That is about static friction and limiting friction, kinetic friction and rolling friction. It is simply whenever the block is at rest with applied force. Whenever block is at rest by applying force, the friction present is called static friction. Whenever block ready to slide, the maximum static friction present, that is called limiting friction. Whenever the body in motion, friction is kinetic friction. Whenever the body rolling, the friction present is rolling friction. Okay. In all frictions, limiting friction is greater than kinetic and greater than rolling. The coefficient of static friction is greater than coefficient of kinetic friction greater than coefficient of rolling friction. Okay, boss? So up to here only theoretical concepts. Up to here now theoretical. Next topic is motion of a block on rough horizontal surface. And motion of a block on rough horizontal surface. Okay. So listen, a block is on rough horizontal surface. A block is on rough horizontal surface. Its mass is m. Now on this block, now forces are weight of the block acting vertically down and a normal reaction acting upwards. Normal reaction. Normal means perpendicular. Okay, this reaction is always perpendicular to surface. Okay. Now a force is applied. The force applied on the block. Okay. To move the block, we are applying this much force. It is a force applied force and also called external force. It is called external force or force whatever we applied. Okay. Whenever the force applied here, there is a maximum static friction or limiting friction. Okay. Whenever the force applied here friction present. The frictional force is present between block and ground also. Okay. Now, here what is the minimum force required to move the block? The minimum force required to start the motion. ఈ బ్లాక్ ని జస్ట్ మూవ్ చేయాలంటే what is the minimum force required? That minimum force should be equal to limiting friction. Okay, when if applied force is less than limiting friction, what happens? This block is at rest. If applied force equal to limiting friction, what happens, boss? Block is just begin to move, not move. Block is move, ready to move, start out. Start out and ready out. Okay, boss? If applied force is equal to limiting friction, then this block is ready to slide, not slide, just begins to slide. And just ready to move. Okay. So what is the minimum force required to move this block? The minimum is very important. Minimum force required. The minimum force required to move the block is, okay, minimum force required to move the block, that minimum force is limiting friction. Okay, minimum force required to move the block is that minimum force should be how much? That minimum force equal to, okay, if you apply this much force, this block is ready to move. So limiting friction, what is form of limiting friction? Mu s into normal reaction. What is normal reaction value? Is equal to mg. Okay, so this is the minimum force, and if you apply force which is equal to limiting friction, then block is ready to move. Okay, so minimum force required to move the block is minimum force value how much? Mu s into mg. Okay, but minimum force equal to mu s mg. Okay, this is the minimum force required to start the motion. If block ni move cheyalante, that force should be equal to limiting friction. Okay, now see one by one cases. First case, if applied force if applied force is less than limiting friction, if whatever we are applying force, this applied force or external force is less than limiting friction, what happens first? This block is still at rest. Okay, this block is at rest. So here point is, if our force we applied is less than limiting friction, what is the block? What is the position of block? Block is at rest. Okay, block rest lo untundi. So block rest lo unte appude friction untundi mas ikkada. Block rest lo unte friction untundi, static friction untundi. Okay, now here friction is static. That friction is static. Okay, now this static friction is equal to what? Static friction is always equal to applied force. Block rest lo unte static friction is always equal to whatever the force we applied. Okay, and until the block start moving, applied force will be same as static friction. Okay, and from this condition, ee condition lo block la undi, rest lo undi. Block rest lo unte friction untundi, static friction untundi. Static friction enti? Static friction is always self adjusting force. Static friction is always equal to applied force. Remember, it is very important point. Okay, now second case, case 2. If applied force is greater than limiting friction, if applied force is greater than limiting friction, ఏమవుతుంది boss? If applied force equal to limiting friction, if applied force equal to limiting friction, then this block ready to slide, then block ready to move. Okay, that is second case. Now case 3. If applied force is greater than limiting friction, what happens boss? Then block slide on the ground, then block in motion. Okay, then block is in motion. Applied force less than, block at rest. Applied force equal to limiting friction, block ready to move. If applied force greater than limiting friction, block is in motion. Whenever the block is in motion, what is the friction here? Now here suddenly this friction changes to kinetic. Limiting friction now changes to kinetic friction. What is the formula of kinetic friction? Fk is equal to mu k into n, is equal to mu k into n. N is normal reaction. What normal reaction formula? Okay, mg. Okay, this is the kinetic friction. Sure. If applied force is less than limiting, block is at rest. If applied force equal to limiting friction, block ready to move. If applied force is greater than limiting friction, block is in motion. Whenever this block is in motion, now the friction is called kinetic friction. Kinetic friction is mu k into n or mu k into mg. Okay.